Just the other day, I was thinking about my first lessons. Summer's over, a new semester's started, and I'm unsure what to do for my first lessons. Despite teaching for 19 years, I always feel a sense of dread and nervousness whenever I step into a new classroom. However, after a few minutes of preparation, thoughts and consideration, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. In this video today, I'm going to be sharing with you my 5 tried and tested activities that I incorporate into my lessons. If you're a channel member here, you'll have access to all lesson plans and notes. Without any further delay, let's start. The first lesson idea that I'm sharing with you today is find someone who. Now, if you've been a student or if you've been teaching for a short while now, you'll know this activity. Teachers may have incorporated it into your lessons whilst you were a student, or maybe you've done this activity yourself. It was one of the first lesson activities that I experienced as a student when I started my degree course. The professor was there, he got the class started, and for me, I didn't know anybody in the classroom. But after about 10 minutes, I was chatting away to all the students in the classroom. But what is find someone who? So as you can see in this worksheet, try to speak to all the students in the classroom and try to find out their name. Remember to ask full questions. So this is a prompt for the students. And then you've got a question, an example, have you lived in 2 countries? And then try and provide a full answer. Yes, I've lived in 2 countries. Or no, I haven't lived in 2 countries. And you can see here just below the first, find someone who has lived in 2 countries. Make sure that you demonstrate to students what you're going to be doing and what's expected of them. Once you've finished, one thing that I like to do is, get students to share their findings with the rest of the class afterwards. The second first lesson activity that I usually fall back on as well is a student survey. Have you ever? It's a wonderful opportunity for students to develop that rapport that's required between themselves and then to reflect on any experiences that they've had. As you can see on the survey, there's different questions. Have you ever ridden a camel or horse? Have you ever experienced culture shock? Have you ever wanted to get a tattoo or piercing? Have you ever had a pet? Etc., etc. You've got different opportunities for the student to ask 3 students in total, but before they ask other students, get them to write down their own answers. So yes, I have, no, I haven't. And then once they've finished writing down their own answers, you can get students to mingle and try and find 3 different students in total to speak to. It would be an opportunity for students to get to know each other quite well and also discover anything that's kind of interesting. As with the previous activity, I always like to get students to share any interesting information that they've discovered after surveying other students. The third first lesson activity that I sometimes go back to is 2 truths and 1 lie. I was introduced to this during the Celtic course and I found it quite interesting because I'd never encountered this activity before. But it's a very simple, minimalistic approach to teaching where you don't really need any materials per se. You could have maybe a slide, a PowerPoint slide, or you could share the statements up on the whiteboard and you can write them down yourself. What I would do is on the whiteboard or on a PowerPoint slide, share 3 statements about myself. As you can see in the structure of the lesson, I've included a sample of the statements I would share with potential students. So have a think about what you would like to share. So for me personally, I've played a saxophone with professional orchestras and bands. The second would be I've studied abroad in France for a semester as part of my undergraduate degree. And then finally, I've lived in 4 countries, including the UK. Now, the first 2 are true, and the third is false. I've lived in 5 countries, not 4, including the UK. But you get the students to guess which one's false and maybe put them into groups or pairs, maybe get them to brainstorm their own ideas. And after a short time, you nominate particular students to share what they think is true and which one is false. And then you reveal yourself which is true and false. The next step would be for the students to write down 3 sentences or statements about themselves, 2 which must be true and 1 which must be false. The students then mingle with each other, guessing which statements are true and which one's false, and it just develops that rapport. It's very simple, very easy, and once you demonstrate to the class, they know exactly what to do. Okay, number 4 for first lesson activities is, what is the question? It's a great opportunity for you to assess how students construct questions and whether their construction is grammatically correct. You can assess their language ability using question forms, and also getting them to think a bit more about answers that they see and whether they can construct it based on feedback that you provide. Anyhow, it's a wonderful icebreaker activity. It's great for teens as well as adult learners. So to structure it, on the whiteboard or a PowerPoint, I would share a particular table, and you can see here on this worksheet an example, a sample here. And I've numbered 12 tables, so 1 to 12, and personal information. Place students into different groups, either small groups, 3s or 4s preferably, and for each information that's shared in each box, so 1 to 12, you get the students to think about what are the questions for that particular box. So for example, number 1, Martin, the question would be, what is your name? And you can see here on the worksheet, I've got an example here. We choose number 2, being 19 years. What's the question? How old is your son or daughter? No, that's not the correct question. Next group, we choose question 2. What's the question? How long have you been teaching? 19 years. That's correct. You get 1 point. And then you tick that off, and then you go around different groups. So let's say you have 3 or 4 groups in the class, and the group with the most amount of correct questions are the winners at the end. The next step would be for students to try and fill in information about themselves. And here we've got a sample of a student worksheet and different boxes which are available, 12 boxes in total. They fill in the information, just the answers only, no questions. And then that student would then share with other students, and the other student would then try and guess what the question is. It's a great way to develop question forms and for students to get to know each other quite well as well. The final lesson activity for first lessons would be getting to know students' names. This one, it doesn't really have a name, but if I were to name it, I would maybe call it name circles or something like that. Now, I get students into a circle, standing around in a circle. But if you have a large class of 40 students, then maybe getting students into 2 circles of maybe 20 each, that would be adequate. Or you could do, smaller and smaller groups and maybe 10s in each circle. So you start off with yourself and you say, my name is Martin and I like photography. And then you may want to use a small object, and that's the object for the student to speak, and you've got that, and then you pass it over to the next student, and then that student will then introduce you and then themselves. So it's like, hello, my name's David and I like cats, and this was Martin and he likes photography, and then move over to the next student, and then that student has to remember the previous information. So this was Martin, he likes photography, and this was David and he likes cats, and I am Stephen and I like hiking. And then you go on around and round and round, and then it ends back to me, and I have to try and remember and recall all the names and something that they like. It's a really good activity for you as a teacher to recall and memorize names. It can get quite funny because once you get to about 12 or 13 students, it gets kind of difficult. And then what I do is I get the students to sit back down and I try and recall, okay, this is David, this is Simon, etc., etc. Those were my 5 favourite first lesson activities, and I certainly hope this helps you when it comes down to those nerve-wracking, anxiety-inducing activities, that first day where you're as nervous as the students entering the classroom. And if you have any favourite first lesson activities, feel free to share in the comments below. As mentioned previously, if you're a channel member, you can gain access to all the worksheets I've shared in today's video. And hit that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.